Hello and welcome to MoLawNow. My name is Jessica Shoemaker and I'm a staff reporter for Missouri Lawyers Media. Our guests today are Tricia Rojo Bushnell, Executive and Legal Director of the Missouri Innocence Project, and Megan Crane, Co-Director of the MacArthur Justice Center's Missouri office. October 2nd marks the 7th annual International Wrongful Conviction Day. According to the MIP, studies estimate between 2 to 5% of all inmates in the U.S. are innocent of the crimes for which they have been convicted. To date, 49 Missourians have been exonerated, but there is still plenty more work to do, according to the MIP. In conjunction with International Wrongful Conviction Day, the MIP and MacArthur Justice Center have announced plans to combine forces to overturn wrongful convictions in Missouri and throughout the Midwest. As part of this effort, Megan will lead the newly formed Wrongful Conviction Project, which is based in the MacArthur Justice Center's Missouri office. Welcome, Megan and Tricia.
Thank you for having us.
First of all, can you tell us how this partnership came to be?
I'll go first. The Midwest Innocence Project, we've been doing the work for quite a bit of time, since about 2003 in our region. It's a 5-state region: Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, Arkansas, and Iowa. And we work with lots of partners, lots of wonderful organizations like KU School of Law, the Iowa State Public Defender, the University of Missouri School of Law. And so Megan had previously been at the Center on Wrongful Convictions, which is an organization that does innocence work based out of Northwestern University School of Law. And we had worked together on a number of cases before, and both had a strong interest, especially in cases involving juveniles with backgrounds of juveniles. So when Megan moved and worked at MacArthur, we continued to do some of that work together. And it just seemed like the right fit and the right time. And we were ecstatic when MacArthur said that this was the work that they wanted to enter. And I think Megan can talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Tricia. I second and echo everything Tricia said. And we'll just add, from MacArthur's perspective, MacArthur Justice Center is a civil rights litigation nonprofit organization. And its main mission is criminal justice reform, and specifically holding bad state actors or state actors who commit misconduct accountable. So wrongful convictions have always been on their radar and a part of the work they've done. Historically, they've done it from the civil litigation side, suing state actors after someone has been exonerated for their misconduct. But because of my background and Tricia and I's prior relationship, once I moved here and had been working with MacArthur for a couple years, it was just a natural fit and made sense for MacArthur to expand into also litigating and investigating the work and the labor and resource intensive work that goes into achieving that exoneration. So I think that MacArthur is thrilled to join this fight with Tricia and to be able to build capacity here in Missouri to represent more people. And as Tricia pointed out, reduce the number of years that people have to wait for justice, which in most cases is far, far, far too long.
Megan, I was wondering you tell me about your new role with this project and just what it entails.
Yes. We have launched a project within the Missouri office. Our office here is located in St. Louis. It's called the Missouri Wrongful Conviction Project. And like MIP, we are solely focused on investigating and litigating both in state and federal courts cases of credible actual innocence and wrongfully convicted in Missouri. We will take some cases from neighboring states, and Tricia and I are currently working on an Arkansas case. But Missouri will be our primary focus. And we do basically what MIP does. And in most or all of our cases, we will be co-counseling with MIP in those cases, which I think Tricia and I are fired up because I think that's just going to be an energized and resource-rich partnership and make for better teams.
Absolutely. I saw Tricia's tweet yesterday, and I retweeted it. But just how it just really is going to boost your manpower in being able to do these cases.
Nick has an amazing track record doing this work already, but this is work that there can never be enough people doing it. Based on the statistics you said at the beginning, we know there are hundreds across the country, but even here in Missouri, behind bars who didn't do the crime that they're in there for. And particularly on the St. Louis side of the state, there's a lot of excellent attorneys doing this work. But most, if not all of them, have another type of practice as well, and they do this as part of their practice. So we're thrilled to be able to have me and hopefully others soon do solely focused on the wrongful conviction litigation.
To go along with that, the need in Missouri is so great. So we track the number of applications that we receive and the number of open applications we have from folks in all of our states. And Missouri by far has more than any other state that we work in. So we have 400 applications currently pending in Missouri that are waiting for assistance, right? And about half of those are from St. Louis region alone. So there's some really interesting, the really important partnership, not only just for the resources and the manpower and the expertise that Megan brings, but the location and the rich connection to being in St. Louis. We do have other lawyers based in St. Louis, but it cannot be strong enough other than to live there and be there and know what's happening for folks on the daily.
I wanted to talk to you also about this case that you're already working on together. You're working on the case of Michael Polite. Michael was only 14 when he was charged with his mother's murder, though no physical evidence has linked him to the crime. Today, Michael is 36 years old. His case was recently highlighted by the MTV show Unlocking the Truth. Tricia, can you give us an update on where his case stands?
Yes. So we filed what is called a Rule 91, or state habeas petition, on behalf of Michael earlier this year. The state is opposing that petition, which is sadly not a surprise to us. But we do have quite a large team working for Mike, because all of these cases are really extensive, labor-intensive, time-intensive. And so Midwest Innocence Project, along with the MacArthur Justice Project, as well as Langdon Emerson, the law firm of Langdon Emerson, have come together to represent Mike. So we are waiting for the decision on whether or not we will get an evidentiary hearing and what that will look like going forward. But that's sort of where we are in the process right now.
And one thing I wanted to talk with you about his case also is just that it's so, there's aspects of his case that are just typical of conviction cases. You said there are aspects of his case that are hallmarks of these wrongful conviction cases. And I was wondering if you can tell me kind of what those are.
Yeah, Michael's case has many of the hallmarks of a wrongful conviction that we see in far too many of our cases. One, we're talking about a vulnerable suspect to begin with that the police prematurely focus on. This was a 14-year-old kid in the minutes and hours following his mother's death, not only learning his mother died, but being the one to discover his mother's burning body. It was a rush to judgment from the moment they had Michael in their crosshairs. They pretty much never looked back. It is an example of the misclassification of a kid as guilty, which a lot of my past experiences in representing kids who are wrongfully convicted of crimes. And this is a common thing that happens because police are trained to act like human lie detectors and interpret behavior and cues and the words chosen by witnesses they're interviewing. And a traumatized kid who just saw his mother die is going to act unusually. It's going to act abnormally. And so they interpreted what they found to be a surprising emotional response, or some of the first statements he chose to make, as suspicious, decided they were guilty. He was guilty based on that alone. And then there was a rush to judgment, which is what we see in almost every wrongful conviction case. From that point on, police were solely focused on Mike. There was evidence pointing to other suspects and much more credible suspects with a legitimate motive, unlike 14-year-old Mike. But they ignored all that evidence and just pushed ahead with Mike to try and convict Mike and sentence this kid to life in prison.
And what we see with that, how that carries forward, is when they use that tunnel vision, creates cognitive bias, right? When we believe something and we believe it to be true, and then that carries over into what we already know to be some unreliable areas of forensic science, right? So forensic science is as much as an interpretation as an art as it is a science in many of those different fields. And so what we saw here is they already believed Mike had committed the crime. And so then they used what we now know to be discredited reasoning to say that Mike must have started this fire that was involved in the crime. And they even then got on the stand and testified that there was gasoline on Michael's shoes, when if you look at the very reports that they had, there was not gasoline. In fact, the chemicals that were seen in that chromatograph are the facts that there are chemicals used in the manufacturing of shoes, right? So what they did is they said, oh, these are the rubber of the shoes, that must be gasoline, and that's incorrect. And nobody caught it and nobody did anything because that tunnel vision is just so pervasive and so there from the get.
the key piece of evidence at Mike's trial was this supposedly scientific evidence linking Mike to the crime, supposedly the accelerant found on his shoes, which in fact was part of the glue and materials in all shoes, all of those brands of shoes, part of the manufacturing process. And that seems completely shocking and appalling. But I actually had another case like with exactly that same fact in 2000. He was exonerated, in 2011, I think, in California in federal court, convicted of arson, served 17 years. It was the exact same evidence. His shoes had chemicals in it that supposedly indicated an accelerant, and it turned out to just be part of the manufacturing process of his shoes. So this happens and still is not a widely known thing. It is still something that leads police to link someone to a crime erroneously.
I just want to say, I think I'd be doing a discredit to the fact that it is International Wrongful Conviction Today right now. And that what this means when they rush to judgment for Mike is they not only harm Mike, they've not only stolen from Mike, they've stolen for the entire Polite family who lost their mother, right? And has spent this entire time, nearly 20 years, not even able to grieve for their mother properly because they've also been fighting to bring their brother home. And I think that's something that when we talk about wrongful convictions, just the incredible harm it does on entire communities when we rush to judgment.
But one other thing to add there, which happened in Mike's case and again happens in most wrongful conviction cases, is when tunnel vision kicks in and focuses on the wrong suspect and evidence is then interpreted through that lens of assumption of guilt, it short circuits any investigation that would have come afterwards, and it contaminates any investigation that would have come afterwards. And what that means is not just the grave injustice for that wrongfully convicted person, but it's the grave injustice for the victim and the victim's family, because the opportunity to find the real perpetrator then becomes much, much more unlikely, because the investigation that needs to be done when the evidence and when witnesses' recollections are fresh doesn't happen. And if you try to pick it up again 10, 20, 30 years later, when we've actually gotten someone exonerated, hopefully you can still identify the true perpetrator, but all too often you can't. The evidence doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. It's not only a loss to, the victims and the victims' families, but it's also, society as well. I don't mean to opine too much here, but I know that there's also, the society's interest in seeing justice done.
And in safety, because in multiple cases where the true perpetrator was identified years or decades later, we know of multiple serious crimes, even murders, that they committed in that period of time, which could have been avoided if a thorough investigation had been done in the first place.
I think we really organically talked about this but just to put a more direct focus on it, why is this, wrongful conviction work just so critical?
There are so many reasons. I think, first, when we look at wrongful conviction, what we're understanding is it's laying bare all of the problems in the system. We focus on folks who are actually innocent, but folks of all sorts, and particularly Black and brown folks from lower socioeconomic income statuses, get caught up in the system for a variety of reasons. And when we look through the wrongful conviction lens, we can see what those reasons are quite clearly, right? We can talk about flawed forensic science. We can talk about false confessions, the changes in eyewitness identification processes. We can talk about systemic racism and how that brings wrongful convictions to bear, but also just problems in the criminal justice system generally. The criminal legal system is a multi-billion-dollar system, right? All of these different actors that go into it. But if you think about it, all of the money that is spent on that, the safety valve for when they get it wrong are these tiny little innocence organizations and partnerships like we have with MacArthur that are there to correct these this mountain of force that comes forward. And so we are, and the folks who are directly impacted by this are the canaries in the coal mine. If we are not paying attention to this, if we aren't making sure that we're making things accurate, reliable, and equitable, then we wouldn't be a fair and just society, right? We have to do this work for everyone. So I think this is the easiest lens to get there.
I don't think I can say it any better than that. But I think I would just emphasize and summarize, that the wrongful conviction work is critical because most tangibly and most directly it frees innocent who are sitting behind bars across the country. But it also benefits the public, the victims' families, and racial and social justice more broadly, because the innocent movement, I think it's indisputable, has been a primary driver of criminal justice reform on issues across the board. And it is increasingly a driver also of racial justice reform, particularly as racial issues impact the criminal justice system, which obviously is pervasively and at every level and in every way.
Once again, our guests have been Tricia Rojo Bushnell and Megan Crane. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure our audience will be interested in hearing more about your work to free the wrongfully convicted, and will continue to follow your efforts. I'm Jessica Shoemaker for MoLawNow. Thank you.